All right, so now we can start talking about the group. So we'll do hemichordates first. And again, what I'm going to do with these next couple of lectures is kind of combine the anatomy and taxonomy together as we go along, because the anatomy is not as complicated. And so we'll do that. And then once we get past the protochordates and start moving into the true chordates, we'll go just talking about taxonomy and life history for a while, and then we'll come back to the anatomy. So remember, hemichordates have this larva, all right? Just so that everybody understands development, when an egg and a sperm come together, they form an embryo, right? That embryo divides. And in some organisms, what is going to hatch or merge or be the neonate or the baby is something that looks like a copy, but smaller of the adult, right? Like us. We call that direct development, all right? That's what's called direct development. Organisms that have a larval stage, that's going to be called indirect development, right? So frogs have indirect development, right? They have tadpoles and then the adult frog. Hemichordates have indirect development. They have a larva called a tornarian larva, which means to twirl, like a tornado. That's how I remember it. And it looks a lot like an echinoderm larva, right? So it's got a nice morphology that's very similar to the echinoderms. But this is what the adult looks like, right? So this is an adult, or at least a piece of an adult. It's really hard to get a whole adult because they're really long. They can be up to 3 feet long, and they dig in the sand. And if you ever seen something like this is a fecal cast of an acorn worm. So I've seen these all along the East Coast, if you look for them when you're out at low tide. And what you have is in the sand down here, you have a feeding acorn worm. So they're really common, and they are sand cleaners. That's really what they do. They filter feed or remove organic debris from the sand and digest it and clean the sand. And that's what they basically pass the sand through their digestive tract, and basically you get clean sand with some mucus associated with it. Now, there are two classes here within phylum Hemichordata, because remember, it's part of the supraphyla Amblycauria, right? And they are class Interopnusta and class Pterobranchia. Great names. Intero, when you see this word, this is a word that you all should know as if you're going to do any anatomy. Intero means digestive tract, right? So the enterosystem is the digestive system. An enteroendocrine cell is a cell found in the digestive tract. So entero means digestive tract. Nusta means to breathe. It's using the digestive tract to breathe. And so that's where this name comes from. And we're going to start talking about the dual kind of function of the pharynx here in a second. And then the name will start to make sense. This one here is called Pterobranchia. Ptero means winged, like pterodactyl, right? Winged dinosaur. Ptero-winged branchia means gills. So they got winged gills, which refers to their gills that look like wings. All right, so here is a feeding pterobranchiid. And you can see here are some gills that they've thrown out, and they move like wings when they're moving them around to capture food. That's where the names come from. We're going to use the acorn worm, the class Interopnusta, as our example here. Now in the lab, I don't have any of these. I used to have several of them, and I was an idiot when I came here and got rid of them. Because we had a couple marine biologists, and maybe I'll try to get another one. At my old institution, they would always bring me a new one, and I should have fixed one and kept it but I don't have any examples for the lab, so we're just going to use them in lecture. But this is kind of the drawing that you see in the textbook that we use in this class as an alternative. Here's what a real one looks like. The proboscis here, this word proboscis means elongated snout or trunk. So this proboscis in the figure is really small. In many of the Interopnusta, it's really long and torpedo shaped. I mean, it could be a third of the length of the first third of the actual worm itself. And they have a little collar. You can see kind of a thickening where the proboscis meets the body, and then they just look like a long worm after that, right? But they have some features that are very different than a typical worm, right? What we would consider an invertebrate worm. They have a pharynx, which remember is maybe a characteristic of a chordate because they have slits in their pharynx, just like we do, right? So remember, that's one of the chordate characters, to have those branchial bars or those pharyngeal slits. They have that property. The other really interesting thing about this particular organism is they have two nerve cords, which is very strange. They have a nerve cord associated just with the collar and the proboscis. And then they have a really long nerve cord that runs down the rest of the body. They're not associated with one another. They're not attached in any way. The nerve cord that runs the length of the body is a ventral nerve cord, just like most invertebrates. The nerve cord that's associated with the collar and at least the first part of the proboscis is a dorsal hollow nerve cord. So they got like this intermediate. They got part dorsal hollow nerve cord and then a normal ventral solid nerve cord, just like an invertebrate. So they have at least two of the features, right, of a chordate. They also have an anus, but the anus is typically at the end of the worm, so they don't have really a post-anal tail. But they have several other features that are very chordate-like. So let's talk about some of the other anatomy here. So this is kind of a drawing of this. Right behind the collar is the digestive tract, right? And really what they are is a really long digestive tube, and they have some gonads also. But the first part of the digestive tract is the pharynx, throat, right? That opens up at an opening here, an oral opening that you can call buccal. You might see the word buccal in some texts. Buccal means like mouth. Another anatomy term you should, if you're going to be an anatomist, whether you're human or animal, we'll see this word. You can't see it, which is buccal. There you go. So that means mouth. You got kind of a mouth opening or cavity, and you can see that the water here that they're going to suck out of the sand is going to enter with sand and debris is going to enter the pharynx, right? And once it enters the pharynx, water is going to basically empty from the pharynx through these pores or holes that are called branchial pores. And so the water that comes in leaks out of those pores, and everything that entered the mouth that doesn't fit through the slits is going to then be pushed into the digestive tract. And so what they do is they dig through the sand and they just ingest the sand. And then they clean the sand as it runs through the digestive tract of the organic material. And then they poop sand, right? Or they evacuate sand, basically cleaning the sand. And that's what the cask you see comes up as they're feeding, and it holds together because it's got mucus in it, because these cells that line the pharynx produce mucus. They're also ciliated, so they're beating, right? And there are also cilia often associated with at least the ventral part of the proboscis that are beating, and then the buccal cavity in the mouth, so that they're beating and they're drawing water in through ciliary action. You can kind of see it here. When the worm is feeding, it'll extend its head. That will open up the mouth, right, or the buccal cavity, and allow water to be sucked in, because cilia all along the head and collar and inside of the mouth and pharynx are pulling or sucking water in, and then it leaks out through the branchial pores and pouches. When they're not feeding, they just kind of use their collar and push it over top of the head to kind of protect it and close off the mouth as they rest. The other thing they can do is swell the proboscis so that it fills the canal that they're digging through, which makes it really hard to pull them out, right? Completely. So if a predator finds them, they get the bottom half of the worm and not the top, and the worm just regenerates. And so it's kind of a defense mechanism that allows them to do this. So here's another nice picture here that kind of shows you food particles in sand, and it'll hit the open collar and end up in the mouth. Some things that are too big bounce off and stick to the collar, which has mucus all over it, right? And then anything that does enter the pharynx will be pushed into the intestines, and then the water leaks out of the branchial pores. These guys are dioecious. So here's a new term. Di means two, ecious means houses. Two houses. So a dioecious animal is just like us. Our sexual organs, male, are in the male house, the male body. Female organs are in the female body, right? So they're separate sexes. That's what dioecious means. The other term that you will see here when we talk about some of the other chordates is monoecious. So M-O-N-O, mono. Mono means one house. Another term is hermaphrodite, right? Which is a great name. Hermaphrodite comes from the two Greek gods, Hermes, which means male, and Aphrodite, which means female, put together, right? So you find both male and female sex organs in the same individual. These guys, I think all, if I remember correctly, yes, all hemichordates are dioecious, right? All species that we know of. So here's a better picture of what a typical proboscis looks like. It's pretty elongated and very kind of football shaped, almost pointed at the end. Nice collar. So there's a nerve ring here associated with the proboscis and the collar. That's your dorsal hollow nerve cord. And then there is often a trunk nerve cord that runs ventrally. In some individuals, that nerve cord might even be placed dorsally. But for me, most of the evidence that I've read, or most of the papers I've read on them, that this nerve ring up here and the cord associated with the head and the collar is dorsally located almost always. And then the rest of the body has a ventral nerve cord location. This is kind of the tunneling system they build. They can be 3, 5, 6 feet under the sand. And as they move and feed underneath the sand, they leave fecal casts like this. And here's the pelagic tornarian larva. Pelagic means open water, right? So pelagic fish. These are planktonic larvae. They are in the plankton layer up where the water is. They float around with the rest of the plankton. And they look very similar to echinoderms, as we've talked about. So here's some pictures. They can be colorful. They can be greens and reds and striped like this. And they can be found on coral reefs also out in the open. But a lot of them are in the intertidal zone and look more drab colored and clean the sand. All of them are filter feeders. Here's a nice picture of the larva I found online. It's hard to find a picture of one. That shows the twirling larva that's planktonic. All right, that's hemichordates. So that's our Amblycarian phylum that we're going to talk about. So now we're going to move into the superphylum Chordata, the one we've been waiting for, right? And we have 3 phyla in here. We have Urochordates, Cephalochordates, and Craniata. Here's the tornarian larva again from the hemichordate. This is the larva of the Urochordate. All right, so it looks a lot different. It has a long tail that's much more complicated. It doesn't rely on cilia to move it. It relies on muscle, right? Skeletal muscle to move the tail, pushing against the notochord. So a much more efficient locomotion, right? They can swim a lot better, right? They swim like this. They can swim really, much more quickly and much more effectively against current, for example. So that's a urochordate larva. This here is the adult cephalochordate that we're going to use as our example. It's in the sediment here. Again, they're about like this long as adults. And this is called amphioxus. Again, another great name. Amphi means pointed. Oxus means both ends. Pointed at both ends is where the name comes from. So they got a pointed head and a pointed tail. And we're going to talk about these groups here first. So here are our other two protochordates, if you remember, Urochordata, Cephalochordata. And then we'll move in to start talking about craniates. So urochordates are pretty boring as adults, and it's really hard to visualize that they are a primitive ancestral group that shares a lot of common ancestry with all of the rest of the chordates like us. They are basically a sack of water when you find them in the wild. So they are what are called benthic organisms. They're anchored and attached in place, and they are filter feeders. And they come in a wide variety of colors and sizes. But basically, as adults, they don't do much. They sit there and filter feed. They remove organic material from the water. But their larvae are really chordate-like. They have all the chordate characters that we just mentioned. So to be a urochordate, a cephalochordate, or a chordate, you have to show all 5 of those characteristics we talked about, right? Last time. So these are the 3 classes within the phylum Urochordata. So they are Acetiacea, Appendicularia, or what's called Larvicians, and then Thalassia, which are pelagic tunicates. These two here, the sea tunicates or sea squirts, and the pelagic tunicates, they kind of share some similarity in their morphology. This is what an appendicularian looks like. They're really small. And basically what this term here means, appendicular means appendage, right? You probably heard that word before, right? Like an appendage. And then cularia means small, so little appendage. And so you can see they kind of are going to have a very similar body to a sea tunicate, but they're going to have a tail. That's the appendage. And that allows them to swim and be pelagic. So they're an open water organism as both a larvae and an adult. This is what a sea squirt looks like. This is a prettier one up there. I know it's a little harder to see, but you can see it's kind of bluish purple. It's actually really, really nice. And you can see that they are actually anchored as adults and look nothing like a chordate, right? They look like a sac, a fluid-filled sac. Matter of fact, their name, Acetia, means wine. Acea means sack, wine sack, like an old school wine or leather bag is another translation of that name. And that's really what they are. We call them sea squirts. You can take them out of the water, and if you squeeze them, they'll squirt water. So, and that's why they're also called sea squirts. But the larva, this is an Acetian larva. You can see it looks like it's got a head and a long tail. It looks a lot like this, right? Kind of, as far as the way it's put together. A lot of these share a lot of similarity in the heads or within this structure here. This is a thalassinian common, extracellular material that they produce around their entire organism to kind of hang out together. This is more like a communal group of urochordates. We're going to use the sea tunicate kind of as our example of urochordates. Those are the 3 classes that belong to the phylum Urochordata. So here are some pictures that show the anatomy, if you will, of these guys. And they look really simple, but really they are quite advanced or derived, if you will, as far as what organs and organ systems they have. Since they have all 3 germ layers, they do have a lot of organ systems like we have. They have a digestive tract, they have a reproductive tract. They have a pretty complicated or pretty complex nervous system for being something that's very simple looking. This shows you a picture of the tadpole, the head of the tadpole here, which is called an ascidian tadpole because it looks like a tadpole. And then here's the tail, which would extend past the board. Here's a picture, a real micrograph, if you will, of the head. And we'll just kind of go through some of these major structures. First and foremost, all urochordates are marine. They all live in the ocean. There are no freshwater chordates. Now, I will tell you, I found sea squirts in freshwater, but where you find them are really close to the ocean. So they can move into freshwater and obviously do okay. So I found them in Crystal River, which is down in Florida. We were doing manatees. I found a bunch of them, showed my wife when we were snorkeling. She wasn't very interested. But, it's fresh water there. So, but it opens maybe a half a mile or a mile and a half from where we were into the ocean. So their larvae are planktonic, and they're called ascidian tadpoles, and they're benthic as adults. So benthic means bottom dwelling, right? That's what the word benthic means. They have myomusculature. So they have almost skeletal muscle, like skeletal muscle. They don't have a real skeleton that is associated with the tail, with the notochord. And so that they can bend the notochord and use their tail as a mode of locomotion. Now, when you look at their anatomy, they have, at least as a tadpole, they have these two suction cups, which are called adhesive papillae. So this word papilla is another word if you're going to do anatomy, any kind of anatomy, a word you'll see a lot. Papilla means knob or nipple shaped, or just something that looks like a rounded edge or hill. So you'll see like in the skin, derma papilla, or the papillary region of the skin, are these little nipple-shaped structures that are found under the skin. The same thing here. These are called adhesive papillae. And what they're going to do is suction cup this guy to the substrate when they decide it's time to become an adult. All right. As a tadpole, they're swimming around, right, in the ocean. Eventually, they grow to a certain size and they drop to the bottom. And when they land on the bottom, these two adhesive papillae are what attach the animal to the benthos or to the substrate at the bottom. Now, when you go up from there, you will see they have a pharynx. This pharynx is bulbous or swollen. Often it looks like a basket, kind of, if you can see it right here. This is a sea tunicate that is more transparent. It doesn't have a lot of color and it's small. It's a really small guy. And you shine some light behind it and take a picture, you can see that most of its body is this basket. It looks like a woven basket, right? And that is the pharyngeal basket or the pharynx. And it has very complicated pharyngeal slits. So we'll look at those slits in a little more detail in a minute, but you can see that they're going to have two different openings that this basket is sitting in. Now, what we're going to come to find is that past hemichordates, all the chordates that use the pharynx to feed actually have the pharynx sitting in another cavity. It's like two bags. Take one bag and put a bigger bag around it, right? The bag in the middle, or the cavity in the middle, is the pharynx, and then the larger cavity that the pharynx sits in is called the atrium, right? It's called the atrium. And so you can see here that if you look closely, we have this siphon up top called the branchial siphon. And then we have over here, if you look over here, a siphon called the atrial siphon, right? And so the branchial siphon opens into the pharynx. And so they suck water in through the branchial siphon. And what's sucking the water in is all of the pharynx is lined with cells that have cilia, and they all beat together, right? They beat in unison, which produces a flow rate or a suction that sucks water in through the branchial siphon into the pharynx. Then the water is going to leak out the pharyngeal slits and enter the second sac, the bigger sac, the atrium, where it collects the water that is filtered through the pharyngeal slits, and then going to dump it back to the exterior, right? Through the atrial siphon. So you get this flow of water, right? From branchial to atrial siphon using ciliated cells The pharyngeal bars are going to be covered in mucus, and you can imagine they collect organic material and then dump the cleaned water out of the atrium through the atrial siphon. And that's kind of how the pharynx works. This is a great image here. Again, that shows you in the middle here is the pharynx, right? Or the pharyngeal basket. Here is the branchial siphon. Here is the atrial siphon. You can see real easily that this siphon is connected directly to the pharynx, right? So water comes in, leaks out of the pharyngeal slits, and then goes out, right? The atrial siphon. All the organs are down here. As you can see, they're kind of yellow. So all these organs down here, which include basically digestive tract and reproductive tract, is really what is contained here. The pharynx will drain into an intestine also. So, the water drains out the siphon, and then all food that's collected will be pushed to one side here and collected and then dumped into the intestines. So you can pass all that organic material through the digestive tract. And this will empty through an anus that empties into the atrium so that it's swept away, right? With the water that's swept away. The reproductive tract is also down here, and the reproductive tract also will empty into the atrium. So you can sweep the gametes away, right, into the open water column. And then the egg and sperm meet out in the water column, and then they form the larva that's also pelagic, and is called a tadpole as it develops. Now, a couple other things that are really interesting is the actual central nervous system. They kind of have a brain, and they do have a dorsal nerve cord that runs from that brain all along and down the tail where the notochord is, right? And this really small group of nerves is called the cerebral ganglion, is the name they give it. Sitting in this, if I blow up this box right here, you can see the box. If I blow it up, this is a blow up kind of their central nervous system. So here's the cerebral ganglion right here. There's also a little nervous tissue that forms a little sac up here that is kind of membranous. And then you can see there's another ganglion down here called the visceral ganglion that controls the digestive tract. And then notice this continues on as the dorsal nerve cord, right, which will sit on top of the notochord. What's really cool are these two structures that are associated with the cerebral ganglion. One of them is called an otolith. An otolith is a crystalline ball that's attached to a tether, and it moves in that sac. And this name literally means ear rock. That's what otolith means, ear rock or ear stone. And it's heavy. And so it is a gravitational device that allows the animal to know if you flipped it upside down. Because if you flip, for example, the Ascidian tadpole upside down, then the otolith's going to drop right down. If you flip them back over, it's going to go up and drop back down. So this movement of the otolith, it's attached to nerves, allows this little dude to organize its, what its body looks like in three-dimensional space. It's kind of cool. And so it's a much more invertebrate-like structure that allows you to sense orientation of your body in three-dimensional space. The other thing that's associated with this top membranous sac here are cells that are called ocellus cells, which means little eye. They are cells that are pigmented that can pick up light. Now, they can't see, but they know where the light is. So, for example, if the tadpole turns over to the bottom, it's going to be darker, right? So it's going to know that's dark. We don't want to swim down towards the dark. We want to swim up towards the light. So they can sense light and where light's coming from and follow light to stay in the pelagic layer. So not true eyes, but something that's light sensitive. Oh. Okay, doing all right. Okay, so far so good. Now I'm teaching you all these structures in the tadpole, but they're the same structures in the adult, right? I mean, all that's going to happen is the head of the tadpole, as you're going to see in the next slide, is when it decides it wants to become an adult, it's just going to drop down and the head is going to land and then attach itself. And then all I have to do is reabsorb the tail. And then I'm an adult, right? I mean, it's basically removing the tail from the picture, and they can grow, and become bigger in size. Now, what this is a picture of here, before I move to the next slide, is a cross section through the tail. So if I cut right here and pull the tail off and look in, this is what you're seeing. And what you can see is the tail has a dorsal fin and a ventral fin, right, which you can push against the water. It has a very big notochord, as you can see right here, that's fluid filled. So form a hydrostatic rod that allows you to bend and move the tail. And then notice there is a myomusculature on either side of the notochord. And if I beat them in sequence, right, left, right, left, right, left, I can then move the tail and push or propel the whole tadpole forward. Sitting on top of the notochord is the dorsal hollow nerve cord, right? So you can see that these are all characteristics of a typical chordate. Okay, I think I've covered everything. Oh, viscera. Everybody know what the term viscera means? Viscera means organs, right? It's the organs. So viscera, like the intestines and the reproductive tract. So a bunch of pictures here. Get you some real pictures. So here are some developing embryos that have a purple stain. Here are tadpoles. So the little larva. So here's the head. There's the tail. Here's a closer picture of the head and the tail. This is a larva under an SEM, and they've stained it with fluorescent microscopy so that you can see the notochord. Right? So they named some notochordal proteins. You can see the notochord in the tail. And this picture shows what's called metamorphosis. So when the Ascidian tadpole is a big enough size, it will fall to the bottom, landing head first. The adhesive papillae attach after about 5 minutes and glue the tadpole to the substrate. And then we slowly reabsorb the tail, which can take 48 to 72 hours, typically in most species. And now we have a functional adult that can grow to reproductive size. Another cool thing these guys can do is they can asexually clone themselves. All right, and they can clone themselves and produce a little mini-me, if you will, an exact copy of themselves that then will pinch off. It's called budding. Will pinch off and fall right next to them, attach and grow. And so in this instance here, and the reason I picked this picture is because these guys are probably all clones of each other. So there's, 5, 6, 8, 10 of them, right, sitting in a little group. It would be, that makes more sense than all, 12 tadpoles fell in the same place now. So if you make many copies of yourself, when a sea turtle comes along and eats these 3, you still got copies of yourself. It's pretty good strategy if you're a benthic organism to be able to kind of clone yourself like that. So you don't put all of your eggs in one basket, right? Especially the ovaries, if you think about it. All right, so all of the same structures that we talked about. This is the adult now, attached adult. You can see that they have a really complicated pharynx. And their pharynx is really, really interesting, very derived for pharynx or pharyngeal slits. A matter of fact, if you look at the individual slits here of the basket, they're not only small and more numerous than what we see, for example, in a hemichordate, but they also have a screen over the top of them. So this is a blow up of one pharyngeal slit. And it's not just an opening. There's actually a proteaceous screen that allows water through. It forms a sieve, which means you're capturing more organic material because only water can really fit its way, if you will, through the sieve. And the sieve is called a stigmata, is the name given to the screen, if you will, the proteaceous or protein containing screen that covers each pharyngeal slit, that makes it a very, very size specific as far as what can be collected. Very small pieces of organic material can be collected. I like this drawing here. This is looking down on the pharynx. So you're looking down like this into the pharynx. So what I want you to notice is here's the pharynx, and it's got a lot of slits in it, right? The inner sac. And then there's an outer cavity on the outside, right? The atrium. So that when water comes in, the in-current siphon or the branchial siphon, it passes through the stigmata and the slits, enters the atrium, and then escapes, right? Through the atrial siphon, or what's called the excurrent siphon. Now, the other two portions of the pharynx we haven't talked about are, remember, the kind of the ventral side, or in this instance, in our example, on the left side of the screen, the pharynx has a thickened kind of groove here called the endostyle, right? Another one of our chordate characters that produces mucus. And that's where the mucus comes from, that then is spread by the cilia to line the inside of my pharyngeal slits in the stigmata to capture food. And then on the opposite side is a kind of increased little, it looks like a comb, like a really poor comb, if you will, that you would use to comb your hair. That is basically made up of sugars and proteins. That's called the dorsal lamina. And as water passes through and enters the atrium, any food is captured, right? Is stuck to the mucus. And then all that mucus-laden food is going to be moved to the dorsal lamina, right? So eventually some of the cilia move all the mucus that has all the food particles towards the dorsal lamina, where the mucus is collected. And then there are cells here that have cilia that beat down, that push the mucus into the intestine, all right? And then the food and mucus is processed in the stomach and the intestine, and then empties through the anus into the atrium, which you can see here, which will then take any waste products out through the atrial siphon. Also, the gonad here also empties into the atrium so that you can wash your gametes away. Now, the gonad, these guys are hermaphrodites. They're monoecious. They have ovaries and testes in the same individual. Some of them release eggs and sperm at the same time. Some species, I believe, have been shown to release eggs at one time and sperm at another, so to prevent self-fertilization, just depends. But there are hermaphroditic and have both gonads associated with the individuals. They even have a circulatory system with a really poor heart that circulates water. And interestingly, there are a lot of branches to the circulatory system that are associated with the endostyle, which means water's passing over the endostyle. And this organ, the endostyle, might actually have a respiratory function also, right? The ability to allow oxygen to be trapped by these blood vessels and to release carbon dioxide from their metabolism. So the heart over here, which is a weak heart that does beat and move fluid, right, sits in a pericardial cavity, sits within a sac. So pericardia means outside of the heart. So this pericardial sac cavity contains the beating heart. The heart here is really just a vessel that has the ability to constrict or contract. It's not a true heart. Okay, I think I covered everything except for this right here. All right, so tunicin is a unique molecule found in the outer skin of all sea tunicates, and where its name comes from. All right, tunicin is a specialized cellulose. specialized cellulose. You guys know cellulose is part of the plant cell wall, right? Well, they have a kind of hard tunicate. That's where their name comes from, which is an outer covering that has a bunch of tunicin in it, which is this specialized cellulose that gives them kind of a hard exterior, if you will. Okay.